Hi, I'm Logan, and I have autistic spectrum disorder. The reason I'm recording this video is I'm supposed to talk about a particular topic for a fair amount of time. And in this case, I'll be talking about one of my favorite cartoons it's one of my favorite cartoons from when I was in middle school. I had a few problems in middle school, but imagining myself as a waterbender from that show, it kept me going. The Last Airbender is a TV show inspired by anime. It's not anime, I keep hearing that. It is a show about a 12-year-old bald monk. Oh, okay, let me back up. I'm not explaining. I'm explaining it well, all things considered, but The Last Airbender is a show about Aang, who is the title character, the Last Airbender in the title. And he was frozen for 100 years, and he learns, within the first 3 episodes that 100 years after he abandoned his life as a monk because he found out he was the Avatar, someone who can supposedly manipulate all 4 elements, because in the context of the universe, there are 4 elements: water, earth, fire, and air. He's air. So he learned that he was the next reincarnation of the Avatar, the master of all 4 elements. And in the context of that universe, we find out later that he kind of fled home because he didn't like the responsibility that came with being the Avatar. But basically, he left, was frozen for 100 years. 100 years later, he found out that all of his airbending society, he's dead. They're dead. He's the last airbender. And he wakes up finding all this out He finds all this out in the Southern Water Tribe, because he wakes up in the South Pole. It's worth noting that The Last Airbender thrives on good world building. It is probably one of the most complex worlds ever created, for a small scale on television. I know this is an excessive claim, but I put it right up there with Westeros. Probably gonna get some Game of Thrones hate, probably from George R.R. Martin, but basically it's one of the greatest, I'll simplify it, it's one of the greatest fantasy worlds created for children's television, because it's kind of the first few seasons were aimed at children. But The Last Airbender, it thrives on good world building, and most of it is Aang's journey, the main character, Aang. And it's hard to describe, but the first season he spends most of it with the help of his 2 Southern Waterbender friends. Well, one's a Southern Water Tribe Waterbender, the other isn't a Waterbender. In the context of this universe, while all airbenders are, airbenders, all members of the Water Tribe and Earth Kingdom and Fire Nation, not all of them are benders. Confusing, right? But Sokka, who is a Southern Water Tribe, which is kind of inspired by Native Americans, he is a brash, impulsive, kind of meat-loving guy who throws a boomerang all the time. You'll laugh, it's funny. And he's kind of a jerk, but he matures over time and pretty much becomes the warrior he was meant to be. Meanwhile, Aang's crush, Sokka's sister, Katara, probably the strongest female character on that show until season 2, which Toph is introduced. I'll get to her in a minute. But for the longest time, Katara is by far the strongest female character. She learns waterbending essentially on her own, takes it upon herself to help Aang learn waterbending, and even possesses the super cool skill that very few members of the Water Tribe have, which is she can heal people. Yeah, You put water on a wound, apparently it heals. Cool, huh? The whole show has a great, dense mythology that's worth watching all 3 seasons just to see. I only saw 1 episode of Legend of Korra. I'll get to it, and I'm not saying Legend of Korra didn't have some good moments, but for me, Last Airbender was my gateway drug, and it's where I intend to stay for the time being. But anyway, they spend these 3 people, Aang, Katara, and Sokka. Rewind the video if you don't remember. They basically spend most of season 1 avoiding Zuko, who is like this Fire Nation guy. Fire Nation are pretty much the crappy white people of The Last Airbender who like colonize all these places that clearly don't want to be colonized. It's a mess. But Zuko pretty much pursues them relentlessly because he believes getting Aang back will regain his honor, which for him, honor is approval by his father, who gave him a really hideous-looking scar on one side of his face and banished him from his home, the Fire Nation, so now he has to bring Aang back to his father to regain his honor. And Aang and the others eventually make it to the North Pole, the Northern Water Tribe, where they expand Aang and Katara's waterbending skills. What confused me was I read that apparently Sokka, the boomerang-wielding jerk, he actually has waterbending potential and apparently didn't know it. That's a producer's note, though. It's never once shown in the entirety of the show, so I'm not touching that. But Zuko pretty much fails to get Aang throughout the whole show, and he develops a lot over the 3 seasons, but for season 1, he's mostly the main antagonist, but we feel sympathy for him, like we understand where he's coming from. Like, the thing about antagonists, like villains, you don't have to agree with anything they're doing, you just have to understand where they're coming from. But after the North Pole, they travel throughout the Earth Kingdom, because they actually met someone earlier in season 1, a 112-year-old king of a small Earth Kingdom, well, let's call it Kingdom. His name is Bumi. But when they go to Bumi, they find out the Fire Nation has already colonized his nation, Omashu, that I mentioned, that kingdom within a kingdom. And Bumi pretty much tells Aang, like, go find someone else to, hard to explain. Go find someone else to teach you earthbending. And that's where they meet the second strongest female character in the show, Toph, a blind girl who can see by sensing the vibrations in the earth. And, yeah, she's probably the greatest earthbender in the show. At the end of season 2, I'll get to that, but she actually teaches herself to metal bend. No other earthbender can do that. And, basically they meet Toph. Toph starts teaching Aang how to earthbend, and it's around this time that Zuko doesn't have his ship anymore and no really water-tested means of getting Aang anymore. So he and his father figure-style uncle Iroh, who accompanied him through this whole journey, they sort of shed their ties to the Fire Nation, are similarly traveling across the Earth Kingdom. And Zuko actually develops a little more into an anti-hero in season 2. Like, he's really well done. We understand his motives a little more. He grows a little as a character. At one point in the middle of the season, Appa, who is Aang's flying bison, I should have mentioned Aang has a giant bison who is frozen with him in the ice. He also finds a lemur when he finds out his air temple was destroyed by the Fire Nation in that weird bat-lemur combo, Momo. But that's his name, Momo. And the thing about the world building is it's had some weird combinations of animals, but that's not the point. Basically, throughout season 2, they have all these adventures in the Earth Kingdom, and it ends with Zuko pours his heart out to Katara, like they managed to spend some alone time, when they're both imprisoned together in the Earth Kingdom, but Zuko's psycho sister Azula pretty much gets Zuko to betray Katara, Aang, and the rest of the gang, including his uncle Iroh, who had sort of sided with Aang and had bonded with the aforementioned blind earthbender Toph. And it ends with Azula sort of kind of killing Aang. She strikes him in the back with firebending lightning, because some firebenders can do that. Waterbenders can heal, earthbenders can metal bend, firebenders can shoot lightning, airbenders, air. And basically Azula temporarily kills Aang, and eventually Aang is brought back with water from the Spirit Oasis that Katara got at the end of Season 1, which she almost used on Zuko's hideous scar, but Zuko betrayed them and she used it on a nearly dead Aang. I should also mention that the 3 seasons are called books. Book 1 is water, Book 2 is earth, and Book 3 is, you guessed it, fire. So, most of Season 3, Zuko is back home because he sort of half-heartedly earned the respect of his father, while Aang and the rest of the gang, including Toph and, who else was there? There were a few other people, including Sokka and Katara's dad, who they reunited with at the end of Season 2. But they're all together now, and the whole world thinks Aang is dead, and they also think the cycle of the Avatar is done, since Aang was killed while in the Avatar state. And it's established earlier that if you kill someone in the Avatar state, or at least permanently kill them, then the cycle won't go on, and the Avatar reincarnates from Water Tribe, Earth Kingdom, Fire Nation, then the Air Nomads, and it sort of goes all circles. And if you kill one of them in the Avatar state, like say a Firebender does the Avatar state, which is sort of like Super Saiyan mode for all those Dragon Ball fans out there, if you enter the Avatar state and you're killed during it, you don't reincarnate in the Avatar Legend dead. But everyone thinks Aang is dead when he's actually not. And earlier in Season 2, they sort of came up with this half-baked plan to stop the Fire Lord, Zuko's father, Ozai. Zuko and Azula's father. They were going to stop him during an eclipse when all the firebending doesn't work during an eclipse for some reason. Guess power comes from the sun, I guess. But Aang basically gets together but finds out not only that the Fire Lord isn't there, but one of Sokka's girlfriends, yes, Sokka got lucky, Sokka had a girlfriend named Suki, who was kidnapped by Azula, and this sort of blinds Sokka. Azula got in his head there, and they're unable to last for the whole eclipse, and they just go back into hiding. But now everyone knows that Aang is alive, and Zuko knew for a while. He even sent a guy named Combustion Man, who has a third eye that can blow people up, he sent them after Aang, Sokka, and everyone. However, Zuko feels bad enough because he betrayed his uncle, he got the respect of a father who never really respected him in the first place, and so he sort of joins up with the Avatar later, Avatar Aang, offers to teach him firebending, and redeems himself, finds a new drive, which is to help the Avatar defeat his father who abused him all his life. And that's the real moment for Zuko. Like, he has a defining moment. He decides to do good after 2 seasons of not really knowing what's right and wrong. Or at least thinking he did. So despite some distrust from Katara and Sokka, and Toph was actually the only one who really sympathized with Zuko, as Toph had talked with Zuko's uncle Iroh before. And Toph's probably the only one who really sympathized with him. But it helps that the fact that she can see things through vibrations in the ground, that she can also detect when people are lying. Cool trick, huh, ladies? But Toph is quick to sympathize with him. Katara takes some prodding because her and Sokka's mother was killed by the Fire Nation decades before the show. And she kind of holds the Fire Nation accountable for that. But Zuko eventually earns her forgiveness when Zuko helps her track down her mother's killer. She doesn't kill him, by the way. She eventually learns that violence isn't the answer. And Zuko also helps Sokka break his dad out of prison because his dad was kind of imprisoned during the eclipse I mentioned earlier. Eventually, Aang has a side adventure because he wonders, does he actually have to kill the Fire Lord? Because he's an air nomad, and those people are basically like the Buddhist monks. They don't really kill people. They're even vegetarians. Oh, right. When they broke out Sokka's dad, they also broke out Sokka's aforementioned girlfriend, Suki. Back to the main story. Aang seems like he has no choice but to kill the Fire Lord. And during a climactic explosive series finale, during which Zuko reconciles with his uncle Iroh, who reveals he was never really mad at him. He loves Zuko like a son because he kind of lost his own son before the entire show. Yeah, so it's easy to see how he views his nephew as a son, especially when the feeling is mutual, when Iroh's brother is kind of a dick. But basically, they reconcile. Aang almost kills Ozai with all 4 of the elements. And he eventually is like, I won't end it this way. You see, earlier he had this side adventure where he learned how to control energy. Sort of like chi. Like, think chi for all those Buddhist monks out there. And he actually took Ozai's firebending ability literally away from him. So he couldn't use his powers to reap havoc on the entire nation. Granted, he was also trying to use Sozin's Comet, which he would have destroyed the entire world anyway if he had his firebending abilities, but he can't anymore. And the show ends with everything more or less happy, and everyone at the end gets what they want. Aang gets with Katara finally. I should have mentioned that was a great subplot. But overall, The Last Airbender, it had a great influence on me. You know, being a lonely autistic kid with a few friends in middle school, it helped to have some friends who had a mutual interest in this show that I had always wanted to get into. And when I watched it, it was like a whole gateway had opened. But there should be a hashtag somewhere in the video, hashtag autism awareness. And I think it's going to be a really good perspective because I'm not selling myself here, but I think some people say I'm a good guy, and hard to say that without sounding arrogant, but I just wanted to spend these 20 or so minutes just talking about something I like to talk about. And this all came from the heart. This just came from an idea and a show I watched a really long time ago. And this has all been unedited, and if you did view this whole thing and found it interesting, then I really do appreciate you. Feel free to support autism awareness groups that don't view autism as a disease, that view it as a lifestyle. And, you can do both. Autism is a polarizing issue. But, that should be all. I'm Alaska's autistic artist, but really, I'm Logan Smith, and I have autistic spectrum disorder. Thank you for listening.